The ancient tale of Savitri. The story of Savitri, narrated in 300 verses, mostly in Anustupa meter, appears in the Vanaparva, the book of the forest of the Mahabharata. The Pandavas had lost the game of dice and had been ordered to live for 12 years as exiles away from civilization. This was to be followed by 1 year of dwelling incognito. In their wanderings, moving from place to place in different parts of the country, they came again, towards the end of the 12-year period, to the Kamyaka woods. The place was beautiful and gorgeous, with varied trees, ever laden with flowers and fruits. There were woodland lakes, and several streams carried limpid waters with low murmuring sounds. The beasts roamed freely there, and the birds filled the sky with soft, delightful songs. In those serene, cloistral surroundings lived hundreds of sages who had achieved difficult siddhis through lifelong austerities. The Pandavas also chose one of the convenient sites to abide in the holy company of these godly souls. It was here that, on an earlier occasion, Rishi Markandeya had visited the Pandavas when Sri Krishna, with his consort Satyabhama, had been staying with them for a few days. The sage Narad had also happened to visit them at the same time. Urged by him, Markandeya, bright like the midday sun, had taught the sublime precepts of life and of virtuous conduct to Yudhishthir, the eldest of Pandavas. However, during the intervening period of the Pandavas, though driven out to the forest, were still chased and harassed by their arch enemies. All 5 of them, and their wife Draupadi too, had to bear humiliations and withstand constantly the demoralizing tortures inflicted upon them. In fact, Draupadi was once abducted by Jayadratha, and she had to be rescued by defeating him in a battle. In the resultant state of melancholy and introversion, Yudhishthir approached Markandeya and asked him whether in the entire history of mankind there had been anyone who had ever had to face such harsh difficulties and who has harrowed in life like them. The Rishi consoled him and recounted to him the story of Rama, the prince of Ayodhya, whose sufferings, including the abduction of his wife Sita, had been immeasurably poignant. It was all in the cause of righteousness. When pressed further to tell if there had been any woman who too had undergone hardships in devotion to her husband, the way Draupadi did, Markandeya narrated the story of Savitri. Listen, O King Yudhishthir, the most precious fortune which the women of noble upbringings desire and cherish. This is what Princess Savitri won for them all. Thus, Markandeya begins the narration. Long ago in Madra ruled a noble king, an ardent follower of the Dharma. He was of a devout nature and was firmly established in truth. He was respectful to the seers and sages and was kind to the citizens of the country. His name was Ashwapati, performer of yajnas, presiding over charities, skillful in work, one who had conquered the senses. He was loved by the people of his kingdom and himself loved them. Ashwapati's single concern was always the welfare of everybody, and towards that end he spared no effort. But he was issueless. With the passing of time and with the advancing of age, this caused him great affliction. Therefore, with the intention of getting a child, he undertook very hard and arduous tapasya, extending over 18 years. Every day he offered 100,000 oblations to the goddess Savitri. He observed rules of strictest continence and held all senses fully under control, and took just a little food, and that too only in the 6th part of the day. At last, pleased with his devotion and worship, Goddess Savitri herself appeared out of the sacrificial flames in front of him and blessed him. She granted him a boon of fulfilling an appropriate wish of his. She even told him that she, understanding the purpose of his great austerities, had already spoken to Brahma about his desire to have a son. She further informed him that he would soon get a daughter, beautiful and effulgent, Kanya Tejaswini, and he should not have any hesitation or reservation in accepting this boon. It had been bestowed by the great Father Creator himself, and he should be happy about it. In proper time, the king, whoever abided by the law, established his seed in the womb of his eldest queen, the companion of his dharma, Malavi. A few months later, a daughter was born to her. Given as she was by Savitri, who was pleased by the Savitri oblations, the father and the wise ones named her too Savitri. Fair and beautiful, like the goddess Fortune, the princess grew into full maidenhood at an appropriate age. With large hips and slender waist, graceful as she was, the lotus-eyed, she looked truly like a perfect golden idol. People often thought her to be some heavenly damsel, Dev Kanya, who had come down here as Ashwapati's daughter. And indeed, because of that unsurpassable beauty and the fiery splendor of her youth, no king or hero prince dared approach her, extending his hand in marriage. Once on a good and festive auspicious day, at the turning of the lunar fortnight, Savitri took a holy bath, shampooing and washing her hair. Then she went to the temple and offered her prayers to the gods and gave ritual oblations to Agni. The wise ones recited the hymns of benediction. Worship done, she took some flowers and a portion of the food offerings to the deities, the prasad, and went to give it to her father. She touched his feet in obeisance, and after offering him the flowers and giving him the prasad, stood with folded hands by his side. Seeing his daughter grown to full youth and beautiful like a goddess, Devrupani, and yet unmarried, Ashwapati was very much distressed. He told her that she should go out in search of one who was endowed with qualities like her own, a young man of her choice to espouse. She could do so, for none had come as a suitor asking for her hand. He also explained to her that a father becomes open to reproach when, according to the dharma, he fails to give his daughter of the right age in marriage. The noble virgin, blushing somewhat, bowed down at her father's feet, without a second thought, set out on her distant search. Riding in her golden chariot and accompanied by the elderly councillor ministers, she traveled through various kingdoms. She went to the ancient and holy places of pilgrimage and gave away great wealth to the most excellent in sacred learning. In the course of her journey, as she passed through the green wooded regions, she visited several hermitages and made respectful obeisance to the royal sages and the rishis, deeply absorbed in a life of contemplation. In the meanwhile, on a particular day, the heavenly sage Narad and Ashwapati were in council in the majestic palace of the king. About the same time, as if by coincidence, Savitri, after visiting the holy places and the several ashramas, returned to her father's house. Seeing her father and the god sage Narad seated in the palace hall, she, bright and graceful like a bride, touched their feet and offered them worshipping respects. Narad looked at her and made inquiries of the king as to why he had not given his young grown-up daughter in marriage yet. Ashwapati explained to the sage that it was precisely with that purpose he had sent her abroad. He also surmised that she must be returning now after having accompanied her mission. He asked her to narrate the details of her journey and the name of the one whom she had chosen for a husband. Savitri, at her father's insistence, Savitri, at her father's instance, began relating to the detailed sequence of her long journey and the result of her quest. She told them that she had gone to the far Shalva country, which at one time was ruled by King Dyumatsena. He was once a mighty and a defeatless ruler and was ever righteous in the conduct of governing the country. But then he became blind. A neighboring king, his past enemy, took advantage of this hapless plight of his and invaded the kingdom. Dyumatsena was defeated and had to retire with his wife and a young child to the forest. There he engaged himself in tapasya by observing difficult vows. That child, named Satyavan, grew in the hermitage under the tutorship of sages and the elderly rishis, learning the sacred lores from them. Savitri disclosed that it was Satyavan whom she had chosen as her life's partner. But Narad at once rang a note of alarm, even regret, and told the king it was a matter of grave misfortune that Savitri should have chosen Satyavan for a husband. Alas, Savitri has, O king, done something accursed that forebodes a great evil. Unknowingly, she has made the choice of Satyavan, taking him to be one of high merit. True, his father always lived in truth, and his mother had noble attributes, and, born as he was of such parents, he was named by the Brahmin Satyavan, the truthful. As a lad, he was fond of painting and drew horses, and therefore he was also often called the painter of horses, Chitrashva. To several queries of Ashwapati, Narad replied that Satyavan was bright like the sun and had a sharp intellect like that of Brihaspati. He was munificent like Rantideva, the son of Sankriti, and like the Yayati, was exceedingly generous. In the manner of Shibi, the son of Kushinar, he was respectful to the learned and was a speaker of the truth. And because he was beautiful like the moon, people often wondered whether he was one of the Ashwini Kumars themselves. He had mastered his senses, he was a youth of heroic deeds, and yet was friendly to everybody. The sages of the wood were endeared to him and had always high praise for his exceedingly fine qualities. But at Ashwapati's insistence to know also if Satyavan had any defect, Narad said that there was only one blemish, and that blemish lay in the fact that Satyavan was to die on that day after 1 year. Savitri had made, quite unknowingly, for that single reason, an undesirable, nay, an accursed choice in selecting Satyavan to be her life's companion. Ashwapati advised Savitri to proceed again on her quest and find another person for a husband. He told her that as the revered sage, respected by the gods also, saw a short life of Satyavan, it nullified his virtues and all his other noble or exceptional qualities. She should not accept what was blameworthy, particularly when made known. Savitri was, however, firm in her resolve. She stuck to her decision by asserting that it was her inner being which had made the choice, which would alone govern her. It was the entire judge and authority for her. Pramanam me manastata. She argued that only once can the family wealth be divided between brothers and not the second time. Only once can a father give his daughter in marriage and not again. And only once does a philanthrope speak of the word of charity and abide by it. It mattered not for her if Satyavan had a long life or short, whether he had virtuous qualities or was without them, because only once would she make her choice and not the second time. She elaborated her point further by invoking a greater truth of the higher life. By perception does one first come to a certain conclusion, and then one holds it by speech. Only afterwards is it put into action. The perception of mind, for me, is the only single authority here. Savitri reiterated that this was exactly what she had done in making her choice and adhering to it. Narad saw in Savitri a firm and fine, unperturbed discernment. He recognized too that she was resolutely treading the path of dharma from which none could take her away. Seeing also that the qualities of Satyavan could not be matched in anybody else, he recommended their marriage. In the elderly wisdom, he blessed them and wished that the marriage of Savitri would proceed unhindered without any ill happening. Then, invoking propitious things of life and a good fortune of all, he left the palace for his home in paradise. Ashwapati began attending to the details of marriage. He invented the wise experienced Brahmins and all the priests officiating at the holy sacrifice and the chanters of riks. Choosing an auspicious day and time, he, along with them and his daughter, commenced the journey to the forest hermitage where dwelled the king sage Dyumatsena. On reaching the place and following the high tradition of proposing a marriage, he formally made a request to Dyumatsena to accept Savitri as a bride for his son Satyavan. Dyumatsena was somewhat hesitant in the beginning, as he felt that he was living the life of a destitute, devoid of royalty, having lost his kingdom and having been driven out in the wilderness. He felt that he was in several respects no equal to King Ashwapati to establish this tie. He also had the apprehension whether the young princess would at all be able to adjust herself to their present pattern of cloistral life and bear the hardships of a forest dwelling. But Ashwapati assuaged his fears and assured him that he made the proposal in full knowledge of all these circumstances and pleaded not to be refused. He further told them it was with affection and in the friendship which does not discriminate between persons according to their status that he had approached him. Dyumatsena finally accepted the offer and confided in him that in this relationship it was actually his own long-cherished desire that was being fulfilled. The marriage was duly solemnized by the learned Brahmins in the presence of the great rishis of the forest. Satyavan was happy that in Savitri he had found a beautiful wife with all the exquisite qualities of a high-born virgin. Savitri too was joyous that her heart's desire had been so well fulfilled. Soon the marriage party left for Mathura, leaving Savitri behind to live in the hermitage with her husband and her parents-in-law. She laid aside all the ornaments and jewelry. She also gave up rich clothes and started wearing bark garments and red-dyed robes, accepting the simple and sacred life of those forest-dwelling ascetics. She looked after the physical needs and all the small wants of her mother-in-law. Whatever little she spoke with her father-in-law, it was always with a sense of deep humility and reverence. Both of them were immensely pleased by her conduct and behavior. She also performed with noble composure and grace and poise the various routines and the household chores of attending the kitchen fire and using broom and jar. In a like manner, always remaining calm and contented, employing soft and sweet language, mindful of her husband's needs and desires, and in their privacy, she kept Satyavan ever happy. Thus devoted to service and with absorption in tapasya, a lot of time went by. But the virtuous woman suffered greatly within. With each rising sun, or while sleeping in the night, at every passing moment, she remembered Narad's word and felt the cruel day approaching closer. When she counted that only 4 days were left and Satyavan would be living no more afterwards, she resolved to perform the three-night vow, Tridata Vrata, of fasting and standing one single place through the entire period. Dyumatsena, on coming to know of this, was very much distressed and tried to dissuade her by explaining how difficult the vow could be and advised her to abstain from it. Savitri, however, assured him that she was quite capable of standing up to the demand and rigor, and told him that he did not have any apprehensions in her fulfilling it. Dyumatsena finally conceded her wish, seeing her determined to carry it out, and blessed her in her undertaking. Remaining erect like a stick, without moving from the chosen spot and without taking any food for 3 days, Savitri succeeded in her vow by the powers of a strong will and a woman's strength to suffer. On the 4th day, the destined day of Satyavan's death, she got ready well before sunrise and lit a bright fire and made offerings to the gods. Then she went to the parents-in-law and paid her respects to them. When they told her to break the fast, for she had become extremely weak, not having taken food during the entire period of vow, she replied that she would do so only in the evening. Afterwards, she went to the various hermitages around and made obeisance to the rishis. They all blessed her with the auspicious things dear to a young, devout wife. She, accomplished in the yoga of meditations, willed in her heart for their blessings to come true. On returning back to the cottage, she saw Satyavan with the axe on his shoulders, leaving for the forest. She halted him and told him he would not go alone for work and that she would accompany him to the forest on that particular day. He tried to tell her otherwise, but to no avail. Finally, he asked her to get the permission from his father. Savitri approached her father-in-law and pleaded that she could not bear separation from her husband and asked for permissions to go with him. She even told him that had it not been to fetch for his revered guru's flowers and fruits and sacrificial sticks required for the holy yajna, she would have allowed Satyavan to go for work. She also expressed her own little desire to see the beautiful forest full of trees and very hued blossoms to which she had never gone since her coming to Hermitage. Dyumatsena, recollecting the past 1 year, noted that ever since her father had left Savitri in his charge, never had she requested him for any favor, nor had she asked for anything in particular. He could not refuse her request now and told her that she could do what her heart desired. Then, counseling Savitri not to be inattentive in duty while following Satyavan, he permitted them to go together to the wood. Permission granted, the young couple set out happily hand in hand. Satyavan would show to Savitri the sacred rivers carrying waters and point out trees laden with flowers. In the lovely and delightful forests, with flocks of peacocks dancing there, they heard all around a lyrical note of joy. Satyavan would speak to her in honey-sweet words. And Savitri too, delighted by the beauty of the surroundings and in the company of her lover, responded to him with equal sweetness. But she was constantly watching her husband in all his movements and did not allow him to go out of her sight. Remembering Narad's words, she knew that his life was now in ours, and he would die with the arrival of the time person, Kalapurusha. Within, she was in great agony all the while, yet accomplished in austerity as she was, and reckoning the swift approaching fatal moment, she remained calm. Satyavan, lustrous in his strength, collected a basket full of fruits with the help of Savitri. Then he started cutting the firewood. He wanted to complete the day's task quickly and spend the rest of the time with his beloved. But he suddenly felt exhausted due to overwork and began perspiring profusely. There was a severe headache, as though shafts of agony were piercing through the skull. The limbs were in pain, and in the heart there was an intense burning sensation. Savitri immediately went closer to him and sat on the ground under the tree and took his head in her lap. She knew that the foretold moment had arrived and that the Kalpurush would now soon appear.